Deep in the reaches of space lurks an infinite possible amount of extraterrestrial life we could encounter. What kind of life forms are they based on? What states of matter do they exist in? They defy all logic in that of mind, body, and spirit to where it fully changes us as a species permanently. So incomprehensible that a worldwide attack on humanity would likely mean our end. Well, today we are covering the 2017 video game that stole the name of its original predecessor purely for marketing and IP purposes by Bethesda, becoming basically BioShock in space gameplay-wise with nightmarish figures to call upon as threats. What did 2017's Prey offer up that would put your survival into question? Today we are discussing why you wouldn't survive Prey's Typhon invasion. Prey's universe takes inspiration from the divergent timelines of Fallout's nuclear tech-dependent future, in this case spawning a new timeline during the space race between the Soviet Union and the United States of America. In this race of events, orbital stations were created much earlier than our own history. In 1958, the Soviet Union launched the Verona 1 satellite to stay ahead of the United States and relay deep space telemetry back to the Soviets. Shortly after reaching the orbit of Earth Lagrange Point 2, did the crew of the Verona 1 mysteriously vanish without any communication. A second Soviet team was sent to repair and investigate the strange occurrence. Upon prying open the satellite, did the two cosmonauts get instantly attacked by a spider-like extraterrestrial being that killed them in a matter of seconds. The incident was kept under wraps for 2 years until the Soviet Union reached out to the US, pleading for help in regards to the foreign space threat. President John F. Kennedy personally signed the joint venture in 1963 between the two nations, creating the Kletka program. The collaboration had constructed a containment system around the satellite to prevent further breaches, but more so, study these strange creatures. In this timeline, JFK was not assassinated in Dallas, Texas. Emboldened by this, JFK pushed the space race even further. Dissolving the Kletka program, the US eventually seized control over the containment area of the satellite. Over the next 20 years, an entire research and development division of the government created an entire space station around the satellite. During that time, tireless efforts into studying ways to repurpose the abilities of these spaceborne species, now titled Typhons for military and business applications, was titled Project Axiom. But after all that time, these studies would bear no fruit. In 1980, the Pobeg incident would occur where Typhons breached containment, slaughtering all research staff on the station. This travesty, coupled with Ronald Reagan gutting the space program, forced the US government to shut down all efforts aboard the Kletka-borne ship in 1998. Remaining abandoned for decades, the high-tech mega corporation of Transtar Industries would buy out the dilapidated old space debris, rebuilding it and restructuring it into the newly titled Talos 1 in 2030. They would seek to rekindle research into the still untapped potential of the Typhons. In the span of only 5 years, did they take to using new devices called Neuromods. Noting how Typhons consume nutrients from human bodies, Transtar took to using death row inmates as guinea pigs, throwing them in containment cells with Typhon variants known as mimics to kill the prisoners and allow the mimics to replicate from the biomass of their corpses. From each body consumed, 3 new mimics would be created. The freshly born mimics would then be lured into a recycling area to kill them and harvest their organs to make exotic materials. By combining these materials with organic, synthetic, and mineral materials, would neural modifiers be made. What these devices do is basically create a scan of a person's brain, say somebody with an impressive talent like a painter, even if they can no longer perform those said talents. Constructing a synaptic pattern from that brain, a neuromod can be implanted into a new brain via needles inserted straight through the eye via this device. A very painful maneuver, but neuromods reconfigure the injected person's gray matter to retain the original consciousness, but now implanted with the desired skill previously mentioned. A new person injected with the painter's map can now create works of art, or a swordsman's skills can now be put into something like an anime nerd, making them deadly with a katana instead of pretending. The same can be said for anything within human possibility and more. On a side note though, if a neuromod is extracted from the brain, then the individual will lose all memory of their life after the mod was installed. But the fact of the matter was, Neuromods would allow any person to achieve instant knowledge and skill on just about anything. The implications of this technology were astronomical, as all of mankind could retain the best talents and intelligence of their brightest without having to learn or practice. With the advent of the Typhons, superhuman and even otherworldly powers could also be achieved, increasing muscle size and strength, increased speed, stealth, and more. But if given the potential of the alien Typhons, a person could try shape-shifting, harnessing elements like ice, fire, electricity, manipulating gravity, regenerating flesh and tissue, inflict psychokinetic attacks on others, and control other people's minds and technology. Basically, if you can think it, the Typhon anatomy could will it. However, with great power comes great destructibility. Much like the US government with Verona 1 in 1980, history was doomed to repeat itself. The continued research on the Typhons eventually led to a large-scale breach on Talos 1 that wiped out all staff on board, save for a few dozen denizens who would either become survivors or servants to the Typhons. These amorphous monsters would spread their influence rapidly to the nearby moon of Pythias. Eventually, by story's end, do we see they have landed on Earth and overrun the entire planet. But what exactly can these beings do to us that would ultimately have me saying why you wouldn't survive? How would they be the reason for the extermination of the human race? Typhons are composed of an unknown substance stuck between all three forms of matter, gases, solids, and liquids. Every single Typhon having the ability to transmutate to change their shape at will and to fasten weapons out of their own bodies. No studies into their composition have ever given reasoning to their own makeup. Their entire anatomy is outside the realm of anything we have ever known. This matter is able to create elements at will, ranging from acids, fire, electricity, and water. It can also teleport at will, transform into any object it can see or perceive within the size of its own mass, and hack any device/mind within range. Variants of the Typhons can range from spider-shaped creatures to gargantuan beasts and humanoids, depending on circumstances, environment, and human experimentation. Alien threats from other franchises seek to create hive mind intelligence or to overtake planets for conquest. The Typhon, on the other hand, is completely different in nature. Typhons simply are constantly seeking out consciousness to devour and replicate themselves, in insatiable hunger and need to reproduce, with no other end goal. Dr. Alex Yu says Typhons are not evil by definition. They lack the so-called mirror neurons to conceive of such morality. The blackened smogs are just simply looking for prey.
He said it! He said it!
Whether they are evil or not, they will still attack any conscious/sentient being they detect without hesitation. The progenitor for this entire race of deep space horror is the previously mentioned Mimic, the only genuine pure form of a Typhon that earns its namesake from its ability to shapeshift into various inert objects, only being able to do so with ones equal or less to its own total mass, staying dormant and unmoving until prey draws close enough for them to attack, either by stinging them by sharpening their appendages and killing them on impact, or ensnaring a person's head and inserting one of their tentacles down their throat, thus dissolving their cranium and absorbing both the body's nutrients and the brain's complete consciousness. The Mimic's most lethal capability in the long run is its reproduction method. By consuming a human, can one Mimic create 4 or more of its own kind in a very short amount of time, meaning they can exponentially increase their numbers if given a steady food supply. Hypothetically speaking, one reaching Earth would be catastrophic in the fact that making a set of newborns every few minutes in a highly populated city could lead to any major population center being completely overrun, anywhere between the span of less than half an hour to a couple hours. Creatures becoming objects nearby, springing to darkened life to wrap around your head to instantly melt your face off to steal your memories and your essence would wear down everyone's psyche if they aren't of the massive majority of people killed and eaten upon the initial invasion. Mimics are not the only creatures offered by the Typhons, even if their numbers and abilities are completely daunting. They can offshoot into different hostile variants and types of Typhons as well, mutating constantly and creating new versions to hunt down conscious people. Greater mimics can mutate to morph into larger objects with more complexity to their design, becoming complex machines and automatic defenses or even cars and more. Their grander size allows consuming people to be more rapid despite not being able to reproduce themselves. If damaged, they can regenerate their frame over time, lending to their relentlessness. Mimics can also evolve depending on their environment. Voltaic mimics will have absorbed absurd amounts of electricity, forming crystals around its frame. Arcs of electrical energy will cascade between these crystals, causing high volumes of voltage. Anything touching it will be shocked and disrupt their nervous system. If technology gets in the way of its pursuit, it will simply release a small-scale EMP to shut down electronics and render defenses and offenses null. Thermal mimics can harness fire with their anatomy, preferring to burn a victim alive with their high temperature before devouring them. The surrounding area around them will be so hot that it can char skin. Etheric mimics will also harness corrosive acids that it releases as a large volume of gas around its body when it dies, melting away the flesh of people nearby and corroding the insides of anyone that inhales these toxic fumes. Thousands of these varied shadow spiders sporadically being born to burn, melt, and hack their way through any safe haven or stronghold would easily lead to human populations being quickly overwhelmed. But in order to advance the Typhon's full mutative capabilities, some mimics will undergo a transformation spurred by other mimics choosing to sting one specific mimic to become what are known as weavers. Floating through the air slowly, these jellyfish-like shadows are metamorphosed to be vectors of production. They constantly create a web-like substance in the air known as coral, a complex neural network that contains the consciousness and memories of every person killed and absorbed by the Typhon that possibly leads to the idea that the Typhons may be a hive mind after all, but to a much smaller degree than what we're used to in this series. Inhaling or being in the presence of this luminescent substance is not harmful, but the psychoactive effects of hearing the voices of all the dead people that have been absorbed would definitely take its toll on any person that was forced to be stuck in the refuse of the Weaver. Weavers also harbor extremely powerful psychic abilities. Enveloping itself in a hardened version of this coral, the Weaver will be practically immune to all incoming damage. This outer shell also will retaliate on anything that attempts to harm it, causing a psychic backlash to adversaries, overwhelming their mind with debilitating amounts of fear, causing people to crumble and fall to be easily picked off by other forms of the Typhon or for people to run away. Either way, the nearly impervious Weaver will maneuver through its environment to create more Typhon variants and more coral. The ecology and reproduction of every single type of Typhon besides mimics relies on this Weaver. Being properly impenetrable allows their army to have a solid means of production, even making balls of tar with spikes protruding out called cystoids. Cystoids being veritable organic minds that when detecting conscious prey will slowly move towards them, exploding in a shrapnel mess of sharpened material. Now, unlike what that guy is saying on Tinder, Typhons will want you more for your mind, though, and want to use your body as well. When weavers approach a cadaver, they will inject the corpse and transform it into a towering humanoid shadow man called a phantom. Blackened figures with piercing white eyes, able to move at incredibly fast speeds, looking as if they are teleporting. Advanced forms of phantoms can shift to somewhat teleport in some recorded cases. They can utilize energy within their own chest to unleash a kinetic blast to blow people off their feet. The sheer impact breaking bones, knocking debris around and disorienting foes. Their mere presence can cause electronics to flicker and bug out while they search for survivors. They will feign speech patterns, mimicking the voices of the body it was born from and those that died nearby and are trapped within the coral. Not communicating, mind you, it is not attempting to talk, not with other Typhons and not with people to lure them in. They are pretending to talk because they don't know anything about language, but are mimicking words that are still left over from the mind before, possibly to lure in others or intimidate them. Once they have spotted you, they will not stop their pursuit, making sure they kill the conscious so that weavers may turn the dead. Phantoms can even be seen stabbing dead bodies to double tap them to make sure no one is feigning to be dead. Phantoms, much like mimics, can also vary with their environment, becoming voltaic where electricity runs through their system so it overloads so they can generate electromagnetic fields passively to disrupt all electronics nearby. Thermal phantoms that shoot superheated plasma at foes to melt and disable them, and etheric phantoms that can split their forms in two in order to spew toxic clouds. Phantoms swiftly seek out people to execute them in multitudes of ways, all while the voices of the dead guide them to their eternal rest. Of course, everyone makes mistakes, and weavers sometimes screw up the production methods of making a phantom. In 5% of cases where a weaver mutates a corpse, they will create something known as poltergeists. While they won't make your clown dolls come to life or slurp up your entire house, these abominations of abominations have most of their body barely visible. They prefer to use their abilities to become invisible so they can lie in wait for prey and ambush them for an all-out assault, choosing not to become an inanimate object, but just being completely invisible instead. Its shape and form indicate deformations similar to scoliosis and stunted leg growth. While it may be slow, its speed won't be too much of a factor once it sinks its claws imbued with kinetic energy into your body to rip you apart. For those that may be well prepared, the poltergeist can also produce an anti-gravity field in front of it in order to disorient its prey and leave them defenseless. Once the outbreak of these amorphous entities starts kicking into high gear and really tearing up our populace, of course, we, as conscious beings that want to live, would of course retaliate with extreme prejudice. For pockets of humanity that act more on fight rather than flight and begin to fight back against the Typhons, then weavers will start turning mimics into what are known as
a grayish blob?
No, the Telepath. Floating about as a veritable sentry drone, they will actively seek to detect any conscious life. Once found, they will instantly impose their telepathic will on them, completely seizing control of their minds and nervous system. All organisms under the influence of the telepath will be unable to do anything outside of its desires, except mutter a few choice words, showing that they are aware but are still under total mental control. If the telepath or one of its mental lackeys detects a new entity that would pose a new threat towards the telepath itself, then the mind-controlled people will rush that target. The telepath's puppet will then trigger a self-detonation protocol, blowing themselves up to unleash a powerful kinetic blast, instantly killing the person while turning their body into a crude fragmentation grenade that will nullify all psychokinetic powers from the telepath's foes for a short period of time. The only way of relinquishing the telepath's control is either by killing it, knocking the mind-controlled person unconscious, or usurping Typhon powers for yourself to mindjack their brains as well. But when backed into a corner, telepaths will also shoot large, homing explosive balls of psychic energy to disintegrate adversaries. Typhons will literally detect that they are getting their asses kicked by humans in certain sectors and decide, you know what, we're gonna make some more Typhons, but this time they are going to make humans kick each other's asses against their will, and if they can't do that, we'll just make them blow up. The Telepath also has a distant cousin by the name of
A grayish blob?
No, the Technopath. While not reliant on taking control of human minds, the Technopath will instantly hack into and disrupt all electronics within a large radius of itself. Automated defenses like turrets will instantly redirect their ammunition towards people, reverting critical systems like life support in hospitals to flatline people, shutting down elevators so people can't escape places easily, and even going up to power plants to shut down electrical grids for major populations. Even heavy-duty military tech will be easily manipulated by the Technopath, either converting it to be used against humans or completely shutting it down so that people must fight back with sticks and stones and beer and guns. Our power-dependent society will be crippled quickly once Technopaths start floating amok. Dialing back slightly though, some of you may be this far into it thinking, well, most of these creatures wouldn't exist if we just nipped mimics and weavers in the bud by either killing them or at least removing the organ in their anatomy that allows them to procreate via the webbing that they use. Weavers will eventually adapt to knowing when they are about to die, and when threatened will eject their creation organ. However, when these veritable spinnerets known as organ E7 are removed, this organ can mutate into Typhon spores that will begin to take on a life of their own. Eventually, growing into thusly named tentacle nests, these creatures will have tendrils spew from their body almost like tree branches, growing its roots far and wide in order to seek out prey to ensnare and crush. Large areas could quickly be enveloped by this Cthulhu tree of life if even one weaver feels its life being threatened, rapidly destroying buildings and places while rendering areas uninhabitable as tentacles attack anything that draws near. The Typhons can also send their creatures underground. Entities known as moonsharks can emulate the worms from Tremors, as even stated by Peter in the DLC of Mooncrash. While looking like oversized phantoms, these beasts can burrow through the earth at alarming rates in order to breach the surface, cause tremors, and attack prey. It is largely blind though, and relies on feeling vibrations on the surface to detect its prey, or via movement, much like the memes surrounding T-Rexes. Because of their existence underground, some sediments and rocks have fused with their anatomy, giving them makeshift armor made of hardened rock. Their durable structure and means of attack leave them hard to counteract. You can't fight it until it emerges from the ground, and by that time it's probably already sliced you in half, and if you're trying to shoot at it, the rocks are going to be taking most of the damage before it rips you in half again. They will more than likely be ripping their way through anything that even slightly moves within its detective radius, compounding with the fact that you will have to avoid causing any kind of vibrations to make it know you are there while fighting off everything else mentioned and discerning what is or isn't a Typhon or Typhon-controlled accessory. When multiple weavers have come to the conclusion that a single threat or group of enemies is causing them too much trouble or threatens their total existence, then weavers will all bind together to create the second strongest monster possible by the Typhon. The Nightmare will be engineered by its species to solely hunt down what was determined as the primary antagonist, and much like Mr. X or the Nemesis from Resident Evil or the Ubermorph in Dead Space, this creature will be almost unkillable in its pursuit, usually having its targets resort to just plainly running away. Even seemingly destroying its body will only have it regenerate its full body to working order after only 30 minutes. Its hardened carapace of a body is extremely resistant to most forms of damage anyways. When spotting prey, it will take on a human form so that it can efficiently hunt. 6 mandibles around its form will detract and unleash 3 orbs of explosive psychic material to kill its target. These nightmares can also be mass-produced to all either hunt individual targets or even one person or some organizations. So, a seemingly infinite amount of these unkillable pursuit beasts coming after you that literally cannot die will surely have you think twice about your chances of survival. However, the nightmares are not the toughest thing that'll come between us and our game over scenario. As mentioned before, the structures created by weavers called Coral are seen to be an informational network for the Typhon. When Typhons feel like they, as an entire species, are being threatened, then all Typhons will relay information forward to create the Apex Typhon, a giant squid-like beast retaining the abilities of every Typhon before it, but with Leviathan-like size. It will instantly envelop an entire district or area that Typhons have designated the general space where the threat is, disabling and reprogramming all electronics, controlling the minds of those of weaker wills, imposing an anti-gravity field everywhere within its grasp. Its black mass can also consume entire places, making them basically untouchable, turning whatever they once were before into parts of the Apex's own body. Its tentacles will seep through any surface it can forcefully enter. Merely touching its body will cause severe damage to you, corroding you, burning you, fusing you into its own mass. Even attempting to record or scan the beast will cause those that attempt to do so to be injured within an inch of their life, just through telepathic mental destruction. The only true means of destroying the Apex Typhon is by either completely eradicating it through means of something like total nuclear annihilation where none of its body remains, or destroying the heart of the coral structure system from which it was summoned. But doing so once it has basically settled in will become impossible while the masses of Typhons still swarm around you, only this time with an unkillable godlike creature swallowing everything into its gaping, tentacled maw of darkness. Now, before finishing up the discussion on every threat imposed by the Typhons, there's still the idea of imposing the very Neuromods from which these Typhons were originally being farmed for. Using their exotic materials to restructure our own brains, we can see using powers beyond our imaginations to not only make life easier, but defend ourselves against the Typhon menace. Advanced humanity would hit a temporary golden age amidst the dark tide of the Typhon. However, when we are using more powers that are driven from the alien menace of the Typhon, it would have long-standing means that could alter the person to become an agent of the Typhon, working for them, and eventually falling under the influence of the Typhons with the advent of so much power. Using these Neuromods en masse via militarized and even civilian personnel to fight back and somehow win and survive against the Typhon invasion and not be manipulated into working for them would have wide-scale implications for the rest of our species' future. The influence of Neuromods would make future warfare amongst humanity much more deadly, even down to each individual person at any given time. Each and every person being able to harvest the best attributes and knowledge of any person on top, giving them powers of telepathy, elemental energy, and more, could prove to be catastrophic, ripping the Neuromods from each other's minds to wipe the memories of everything before. The unending power struggle between countries would escalate, and eventually war, unlike anything humanity had thrown at each other since the threat of nuclear devastation in the 1940s, will have been introduced. This will make the nukes look like child's play. On the off chance we do win and survive against the Typhon, we would not be able to survive ourselves once we and our minds have changed forever. With all of these laid out, it's insane to think how just one spore, one mimic surviving a crash landing to Earth could cause so much carnage and multiply like wildfire. Even if the first few mimics aren't killed or contained when first discovered, their numbers would become uncontrollable. It's possible the mimics could be quelled if they landed in a small enough population, something like a small country town being quarantined and then nuked to hell like the one in the Crazies. But with how tightly under wraps the study of the Typhons were and how they tend to camouflage as inanimate objects or just outright slaughter people before they can even know what's going on, is a big reason as to why most places would just become instant ground zero for a global takeover. The only reason the Typhons didn't explode in population hellaciously before in their 3 attacks in space stations were because they had nowhere else to go in their small confined containment. They were isolated within the vastness of space. A full planet for Typhons to hunt conscious beings would be an endless mental buffet, creating more mimics from each dead body in seconds. Mutations making weavers so variations could be made to repurpose dead bodies, and making such deadly space abominations that the remnants of humanity that did survive the weakest onslaught of the Typhon attack would easily be swept up. The minds of all of our people would be turned into multiple mimics. The corpses of every single person would be turned into phantoms and more. People being instantly mind controlled and going kamikaze on others in an unwilling blaze of psychokinetic glory. Electronics being completely unusable by us in means of defense, offense, survival, and escape. Large cityscapes and safe havens becoming uninhabitable due to the destructive nature of the larger Typhons. Nightmares becoming the hunters of souls, reaping targets within the rubble of the remnants of humanity. Apexes consuming the land as their tentacled grasp expands unopposed. The coral spreading around the world could very well possibly be our retained consciousness trapped in an infinite vaporwave. What remains of our being just being yellow webbing clinging to the air, possibly keeping our literal memories alive in order to propagate a species so foreign to anything we have ever known. We would all either be massacred outright or have our minds siphoned and funneled into a piss-colored cascade. Thoughts forever blended in the darkness to feed the ones that turned us into prey. That about wraps up this look into 2017's Prey. Maybe in the future we can turn back the clock 11 years and cover the original 2006 Prey. Is there something I didn't cover? Did I get a little too philosophical or think too much into this scenario? What do you want to see next? Let me know down in the comments. Big shout out to my editor Chago, aka Quick Flicks, for editing today's video together. Check him out for awesome movie and series recaps. Shout outs to my YouTube channel members and Patreon patrons for chipping in to keep the channel going. You can join them on this list here to be permanently in Wow Such Gaming video history and to get the added bonus of seeing these videos up to a week early before they are released. Thanks for swinging by, and until next time, I'm Zackass, aka Wow Such Gaming. Never forget to stay happy, stay healthy, stay away from inanimate objects, and stay wow.